Full session since the last 2 days, and I think by now people have already given you enough evidences about the good things about simulations, games, and how they impact education. But I was speaking to a few folks earlier and who were candid enough to tell me that what they could not identify are examples of people, teachers, schools in India, as well as a few other places we've interacted with, who are doing it. What are the challenges they are facing? What are the good things that are happening to them? What are the bad things that are happening after they adopted this simulation and games? So I'll start with a quick vote. How many of you are game developers here? And how many of you think you will probably be in a position where you will be evaluating if you should consider game simulations to impact learning within your school, organization? Sorry. So I'll go ahead and change what I'll be talking about, and instead I'll take you through a set of examples, anecdotes and stories that we get from schools and teachers in India, US and Canada. And the advantage that we have is we don't have a sales team. We can't afford a sales team. So the people who design these games, the learning content, are the ones who go to these schools, interact with these teachers and principals. So we get first-hand feedback about what's working for them, what's not, what more do they want. So I'll try to share those things with you today. And just to give you a quick background, we did not start with game design. So sometime back, we developed purely as a research project a behavioral profiling and simulation engine that interacts with a person, tries to capture the key behavioral elements about his or her behavior and predict how that person would behave. Now the question is, okay fine, you have all the simulation, but how do you get the data? And when we try to find out what other methods exist to get data, it's slightly exaggerated, but in a lot of ways things have not really changed when it comes to capturing the non-scholastic aspects of a child, the cognitive abilities, the behavioral abilities. So we started asking the question, how else can we interact with people and get valuable data? And that's when we entered into the area of designing games and activities from a point of view of capturing valid behavioral and scientific data about people. And like Clark was mentioning during the previous session, often people think, okay, games, it's all high-end graphic, it costs a lot, but what's really important is the game design and the methodologies that you use to get data in the right way. That's why I put examples which look extremely plain, as well as games which look fairly sophisticated. And I think I'd like to narrate around 4 or 5 stories from different interactions with schools around the world which we've had. The first thing deals more in terms of certain interesting things of using these games to get the cognitive makeup of a child even before you try and pass judgments on someone's scholastic abilities, maths or English and so on. So in the northern Karnataka, we did a project at a school run by Kaiga. And when we do these activities, we get a lot of data, and most of the students lie somewhere in the middle. And there are a few outliers. These outliers are people who score extremely low or extremely high. And there was this one student who had scored exceptionally well in most of the cognitive elements, but extremely low on vocabulary. And the moment we showed up that profile, 2 of the teachers exclaimed, I always knew this kid was someone who was bright. It's just that all the teachers felt that, but he was always scoring low. We just couldn't figure out why, and now we know why. Probably, because his vocabulary was bad, the scholastic scores were not reflecting it, but teachers could intuitively pick up because they connected to the kids as human beings. But our assessment techniques do not help us convert it into scores when we are trying to measure them, which is where I think some of these new methods work a lot. I'll go back and give you another anecdote which happened when I was in Montreal. There's a group called Kanawake, which is one of the indigenous groups of Canada, and they have a school, and they were doing a few stuff with them, and they said, why don't you take a class? And I always used to think I'm a good speaker, so I'd probably be a good teacher, so I said, why not? So I go to this class, 4th grade, and there are 5 students who are at the back of the classroom looking out the window, and asked the teacher, what about those 5? They said, they're not interested. Like, I haven't even started. But they said, they're not interested to attend. Okay, fine. So I went ahead, and 3 minutes later, 2 more students stand up, and they go back and start watching out the window. So I just give up on teaching. I said, my talk is over. Let me pull out a few games, and you can start playing. So I pulled out a few games. They were related to mathematics. And interestingly, what happened is all these games are adaptive. Like someone was mentioning yesterday, they start with really simple things, but based on your ability, they quickly become difficult or easy. So first, very simple mathematical stuff used to come, and most students used to answer, but no one wanted to come out there. Fortunately, they had a touchscreen enabled whiteboard, so nobody wanted to come out there and play it hands-on. But one child walked up and he started playing, and later on I found out that this was the kid who used to score low in mathematics, and he found that since no one else were answering and these were easy questions, he thought, let me come up and answer. And when it started becoming more and more complicated, that's when remaining kids also started engaging. So it really, in a way, breaks down that notion that we have, these kids are good in something, bad in something, and instead shift the focus back onto students and ask, what are the ways in which different students learn, as opposed to asking, these are the topics, who learns it best? Which is not really what we want to do. We don't want to label people as academic achiever, low performer. What we want to do is find out what makes them perform well. So the other anecdote that I want to share with you is about a school in Delhi. So we were trying to, what we also focus on is often games and simulations are useless if it does not accompany innovations in classroom practices and using them the right way. Dave was mentioning about how we should not measure learning. So we have two sets of games and activities, one which focus on assessment of cognitive behavioral abilities. But based on what schools requested, we also have 80 plus odd games for curriculum based concepts. And here we took a stand. We said we are not going to allow schools or teachers to get any sort of scores back from students. But schools wanted it, because traditionally you give them something, teach them something, you want to get a score on how well they did. Instead, what we said, let's come out with new ways in which you implement it. Divide them into groups. So 4 groups of kids together play as a team, and whether they are able to score well in a game or not depends on each kid's ability to be able to answer well. So they automatically start teaching each other because they want their team to score well, as opposed to me doing well in the examination. So a lot of 21st century skills that got thrown around, like communication, collaboration, automatically become a part when you start talking about multiplayer games, collaborative games, instead of the traditional look at your computer screen and learn kind of e-learning technologies. We also did something with autistic kids in US, but I think I'll skip it for now. So in the behavioral elements, after we get these data, there's a lot of complicated stuff that happen in the background in order to predict what a person does, because like I said, we don't box people and say this is extrovert, this is introvert, because all of us know that based on who we are with, we behave differently. I might be extrovert with one group, introvert with another. So what's more important is not, I'll come back to that, but yeah, there is a core set of profile elements that we can know about a person, and depending on the scenario, these profile gets translated into expressions. So what's more important is to figure out when a person expresses a particular behavior in what kind of scenarios, instead of just saying this person exhibits mostly extroverted behavior and these kinds of profiles. So this was an example. I think I'll go back to Dave's example instead of this. He gave a better alternative. Remember he talked about simple, complex kind of domains. So in complex, if you saw, it said probe, analyze, respond. In simple, it said sense, categorize, respond. Majority of psychometric tests, questionnaire based, do that. They ask you questions, sense, categorize into groups, and then respond saying extroverts behave this way all around the world. But what we really need is, human beings are complex domains. You need to probe, find out as many things, and then analyze and respond or predict. And games and simulations are perfectly suited to do that. They allow you to probe people in different ways and not just in singular ways. And another advantage is often they are language independent. So in another project 3 years back which we were exploring, United Nations wanted to do something across 180 odd countries, so where they were evaluating different tools. One of the main reasons it caught their interest, even though we didn't end up doing it, is it's very easy to make this language independent. Often all you have to change is the labels on different buttons or keys and probably the mode of instruction. But if it's audio instruction, even that effort is reduced. So there's a huge scope for not just the use of these games, but also to develop innovative practices and pedagogical techniques around the use of games and simulations. So the other element which we often get frustrated about is everyone says that all these tools, teachers are not using it, teachers are not interested. And I personally, during my personal interactions with teachers, have found that they are not resistant. Many of them say, I have kids who are extremely good at technology, so I know technology is important. But when I've gone out there and tried it, it just did not work for me. So what they essentially mean translates, this is what I hear when they say that. When we talk about students, we say, let's make it gamified, let's make it enjoyable, let's make it more attractive to students. But nobody says, let's make it more gamified, attractive and enthusiastic for teachers. We assume because teachers are grown-up adults, they'll automatically do the right thing once we tell them what to do. So when we took these things, we initially started with something else, but based on their feedback, what we decided is we'll strip off all the complicated features. Let's just focus on what the teacher needs to do and gamify that. How much time do I have? So we try to make everything graphic. So the halo that you see, a lot of complicated algorithms run at the back end to find out something called self-efficacy of a child, which is how much motivation a child is showing to learn more on its own without any intervention. So the moment the halo starts coming very close to the performance levels, we also have something for academic concepts. This is just for cognitive elements. The halo starts glowing red, which means the teacher has to react and intervene, or the parent has to react and intervene so that the child's motivation goes back up. And often in our education, we don't focus on all these behavioral and cognitive elements. We just focus on the scholastic abilities, which is another reason why I think games and simulations will play a big role, because a key component of these games, like Clark was talking about, is the emotional excitement, not just intellectual stimulation. And also got to spend some time with the Education Research Department at McGill University. And one of the key challenges which people face is separating bells and whistles from learning. Clark was giving the example of this game where it was supposed to teach them different interesting facts and knowledge about the world, but what they learned was to use this almanac or dictionary to find out the answers instead of. So how do you separate bells and whistles from learning? And that was the context for McGuffins. How many of you have heard of McGuffin or know about what a McGuffin is? So McGuffins are plot devices used in movies in order to keep you hooked. So in Pulp Fiction, how many of you have seen Pulp Fiction? So the briefcase he opens and there's some light coming out. Nobody tells you in the entire movie what's inside, and yet it keeps you hooked throughout the movie. And often in a normal game, it's okay if that's the case. But in educational game, it's also important to ensure that after the game is over, they have forgotten about the central plot device. If they still remember, if someone asks you what's the game you played, if they still tell, I played a game where I collected points, your message is lost. So that's a very easy, one of those simple ways in which I think we can separate out bells and whistles from message by asking whatever you are building as a central plot device or a McGuffin, how do you separate it from the message? I'll just end with this, and I want people to respond to this. So usually McGuffin scores, and now it's turned into badge and collectibles, not go much into it. UI elements itself can be extremely good McGuffins is what we realized. So we're launching India's first social learning platform for kids under 14 in a couple of weeks. So we called 20 kids into the studio and they spent the entire day there. And we thought they'll really feel compelled to use a lot of the features that we have built. But what actually caught their attention is there was this profile card, and every time they answered a question, did an experiment or did something desirable, the card used to rotate along with the score change. And they used to ask my lead developer, Sachin uncle, aur kya karne se wo rotate hota hai? And they began to do that. So simple UI elements itself often turn to be the central plot device. Can you think of any other example from games you might have played, not just educational games? How many of you played games which had a boss mode? So often what you do, except for the boss mode in different levels, is same. You would not have done it. But you are curious to see what the new boss in the new level looks like. And it's just a UI addition. And time-bound consequences. How many of you, we have different things that we use, but I thought of giving an example which you are familiar with. Farmville. How many of you are familiar? So in Farmville, right, they have done it brilliantly. People really go to Farmville because if you don't come back and do something before 12 hours, this plant will die. And that's why you go back within that time and do something. Nobody really cares about farming online. But I think these small triggers are what keeps people hooked. Incompleteness. What we do in some of the things is there are all these light bulbs, for instance, in one, and based on how a child interacts, some of them glow and the rest of them are still empty. But I think you are more familiar with LinkedIn, which says your profile is only 10% complete, 90% incomplete. You'll end up doing whatever it takes to make it complete. Bragging rights. This is something that even teachers enjoy, not just students. Leaderboard is a very cliched example. For instance, most of you might be familiar with it. So once you start thinking about it in terms of McGuffins, I think you will figure out new ways to gamify. Even if you're not a game developer, maybe gamify the practices that you have itself, not necessarily with the use of technology, but even on ground. So I'll leave you with that. If you have any other questions, if you want to see some stuff, I'm around. Thank you.